Hello everyone, this is Nikhil. I'm your host for OpenStack 2020. Today's topic is Glance Tasks, and with me today is Brian Rosmaita from Rackspace. Tell us something about yourself, Brian.
Yeah, hi. I'm currently a senior software developer in the OpenStack engineering group at Rackspace. And I'm also a technical lead in the OpenStack Innovation Center, which is a joint Rackspace Intel project to promote OpenStack use among enterprises. I'm a core contributor to Glance and also to Searchlight. Previously, I was a technical product manager and also a product manager at Rackspace. And more relevant to this, I was the product manager for our Cloud Images launch. And Cloud Images use at Rackspace for OpenStack Glance.
Well, thank you, Brian. That's a you have been involved in OpenStack for quite a while, and that's a really good short introduction for all that you have done. Um, can you tell us something about Glance Tasks? You were involved in the conception of this idea, and how did you come up with this idea? What were the requirements for this?
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. And the key thing to keep in mind about Glance is that other services in OpenStack depend really heavily upon it. So while we wanted to enhance Glance to make more image-related functionality available to end users, at the same time, we didn't want to do anything that could affect our normal cloud operations. So, I mean, as you know, you can run OpenStack without exposing Glance directly to any end users because you've got the Compute API. Nova acts as a proxy to Glance. So there's some calls in the Compute API that allow you to manipulate your images. So you can list images, you can view them, you can delete images, you can set metadata, you can do all that stuff through Nova. You don't really need to deal with Glance directly. And also, in a lot of clouds, the only way you can create an image is by creating a snapshot of one of your servers or one of your instances, whatever you want to call it. So you don't, and when you do that, Nova interacts with Glance for you. So Nova will create the snapshot, it'll move the data to Glance, and then Glance stores it for you, creates an image record. So you can do a lot of stuff with Glance in OpenStack without ever touching Glance directly. So the downside of that is if you want to do more stuff that's available in Glance, like image sharing and things like that, you'd either have to put an extension onto Nova or figure out some other way to get access to it. So we wanted to expose Glance, but at the same time, we didn't want to do anything that could possibly affect the interaction because, right, Nova's booting servers all the time. And to boot the servers, it needs images to boot from, and it's got to be able to get them from Glance. So we were really worried about, because at Rackspace, we have a pretty big public cloud. And we were very worried about what would happen if, in addition to just the regular traffic you have with people constantly booting and taking snapshots all the time, you had a whole bunch more people trying to do stuff with images. In particular, the things related to tasks or getting images into Glance, so what we're calling image import, and then getting images back out of Glance for you to use somewhere else. So that would be image export. So you put a lot of extra pressure on Glance. And so we were kind of worried about that from a performance perspective. And then the other thing was kind of a security thing. I mean, there's still people here who are absolutely horrified that we allow end users to import images because they're worried about security implications. So we wanted to make sure that the way you got images into Glance gave us some kind of way to screen the images. And it's not really just for malicious things. It's just for people might import the wrong kind of image. So like in the Rackspace cloud, we use mostly VHDs. So if you imported a QCOW, which you might find available on the website or something, it's not going to boot. And so it'd be kind of pointless to store it into Glance. And so we were kind of worried about too much. If we just allowed people to just import anything they wanted to, then that would put a lot of pressure on the support teams because people would be trying to boot these things and they wouldn't boot and then they'd be wondering what's going on. So those were our main concerns. I mean, and the other thing is images tend to be pretty large objects. So we're talking tens of gigs. So they take a while to upload, they take a while to download. And the other thing is we're a little bit worried about Glance. I mean, Glance had originally been designed to deal mostly with Nova. So it was used to being on an internal network inside the cloud, just transferring stuff back and forth very quickly. We weren't sure what was going to happen when you suddenly exposed it to like a whole bunch of people all trying to upload stuff at varying speeds, some over landlines, with low-speed modems and things, and these very large objects. So anyway, that was basically why we didn't want to use the normal Glance upload workflow. We decided, we want to keep that workflow because Nova uses it and works fine. Our base images team that puts public images into the cloud for everyone to use uses direct upload. But of course, they know what they're doing and they know how to create the images that are going to work. So we decided the best thing was to try to come up with a different workflow that could be used in Glance. And when I'm saying we, it was mostly me and Eric Harlan, who's still at Rackspace. He's working now with the AWS support system that we've got going. But that was the main concern. Was just we wanted to allow end users direct access to Glance, but we wanted to make sure that it didn't interfere with the normal functioning of Glance. So we talked to Mark Waschenberg, who was the Glance PTL at that time. So we talked to him, and he agreed that it made sense to have a separate workflow to expose to end users. And I'm trying to think, I think Mark may have been the one who suggested tasks, because the original proposal was we were looking at 3 different operations for end users to use with images. Import so they could upload an image into Glance, export so they could get one out to use in a different OpenStack cloud or something. And then we were looking at another one called image cloning, which would be the Rackspace clouds divided into regions that are entirely separate. And so the Glance in one region can't talk to a Glance in another region. So we wanted to have a way to put images from one region to another. And I think Mark suggested, these are all kind of very similar functionalities. And we could envision that people might want to add some other things. So for instance, image conversion on demand or something. If you're in some kind of cloud that had, it was a multi-hypervisor cloud with different, each hypervisor using different format images, you might want to do some kind of conversion or something. So since we weren't quite sure what was going to happen, we came up with this kind of general framework. And the basic idea was that to do these kind of long-running operations, the user would create a task. We could protect Glance because we had a separate workflow so that we could, when the image came in, we could analyze it or look at it or run some validation tests or something. But also, we could, if like 100 users all tried to import something at once, we could sort of space the tasks out. So each user would create a task saying, hey, I want to import an image. And then we would go ahead and process it when we had time and when we had resources. So that's basically what we came up with. And the key idea was that we wanted to have a unified framework for these kind of operations. And they didn't seem to be intimately related to an image. So like for import, what you've got as a user is I got a bunch of bits, and I want Glance to take them, catalog them, and make them available so that Nova has them and I can boot a server from it. So I would create it, so I don't, so I hand these things over, tell Glance to do its thing, Glance validates it, creates the image, and then lets me know when it's available. And if something bad happened by having the task, the idea was you could sort of pull your task, see what the, what stage it was at in the import process. It also gave you a better way to get messages to end users, was the idea, was that we could have a richer, because the image object itself doesn't have any kind of way to give you a message. So the idea was a task would have a specific message element. So if some kind of error occurred, we could try to do something specific so that it wasn't just error and you have no idea what. We could tell you exactly, it was a poorly formatted VHD, or it wasn't a VHD at all, something like that. So that was basically what we did. I mean, the key requirements were we wanted to have a uniform interface across clouds to do these kind of operations. We wanted the API calls to be uniform so that if you went to any OpenStack cloud, you would know what you had to do to import an image. You create a task and away you go. But we wanted it to be customizable on the server side. So we recognized that like a public cloud like us would probably be facing different pressures than like an internal cloud at like a physics department or something. So if you've got a whole bunch of trusted users who know what they're doing, then you don't really need to do a lot of screening of the images. You can just say, let it rip. But when you're dealing with the general public, they have different levels of knowledge. Some of them may be uploading a JPEG hoping to boot it somehow. You've got to try to prevent those kinds of things from happening. So we wanted the workflow on the server side to be customizable. We also needed it to be scalable so that Glance should be able to handle a lot of these operations. And then we wanted the way to communicate things back to the user. And so we came up with tasks. Now, I gave a talk about tasks at the Vancouver Summit roughly a year ago. So you can check in the links on the Etherpad for this talk if you want to go back. You don't have to watch the whole talk. You're probably getting enough of me right now. But the slides are up if you want to look through. And it sort of gives you a quick sketch of what tasks look like and the pluses and minuses, actually. Because at that point, I mean, we launched Cloud Images in, it was early April 2014. So it's been almost 2 years that we've had Glance exposed to the public at Rackspace. And the key part of that was having import and export tasks available. So people have been using these things. But we're starting to, as more people in the community started to look at them, some problems started to come up. And I talk about those in the talk, and I can talk about them now too. I mean, the main thing we did with tasks was we wanted them to be flexible, and we may have overdone it in that regard, because there's a JSON schema that tells you what kind of request to create when you're creating a task. But it's got these two elements called the input element and the result element. And we didn't know exactly what people would need in those, because if the workflow is customizable for a particular cloud, they may require different pieces of information. They may require the user to tell them something about what the user is presenting when they're uploading the actual data. And since we didn't know what it was, we just defined it as a JSON blob. So you'd know some kind of JSON would go in there, but you'd have to read the documentation for that particular cloud to figure out what exactly it was. And the same in the response. Once the task had completed processing, you had a result element. It's just defined as a JSON blob. And you'd have to read the documentation at the particular site to understand what kind of information is going to come back to you. So when we designed tasks, we thought this is great because it's flexible and you have a uniform interface. But on the other hand, I mean, it's uniform in the sense that the calls would be the same to create the task and to pull the task. But as far as like actually creating a request, that wasn't really so uniform because it's kind of undefined really, other than being JSON, which pretty much leaves you open to anything. So yeah, so that's the, I guess that's the summary of tasks and what happened.
Thank you, Brian. That was a good summary. I see that there's a lot of architecture and performance considerations behind this. You know, there is a broader vision behind Glance Tasks. And that brings me to my next question. Can you tell us something about what's supported in Glance Tasks today?
Yeah, so, okay. So there are a couple things. So at Rackspace, we expose tasks for import and export of images. Now in the actual code base, there are also some tasks that allow you to do image conversion, although I personally haven't experimented with them. And there's a new task that was just delivered in Mitaka that will take an OVA package and unpackage it, grab the manifest, and convert the manifest into Glance image properties so that you can use the Glance cataloging system to see what properties are on the image. And the idea is that a lot of the hypervisors make use of the image properties to figure out, you know, scheduler can make use of them to figure out where things should land, but also the hypervisor can make use of them if it knows what's on the image and what the image expects to see when it comes up. And so that's been an interesting thing. I mean, it's kind of a simple OVA task. It expects that you have a payload of just one image. Because right now in Glance, there's no real way to link images together. Except, I mean, you could do it with metadata and just say, you know, this image depends on that image, but there's no kind of enforcement or any kind of automatic thing that's done in Glance for that. So that's what you can do with tasks right now. That being said, I mean, I don't know how many people are actually using them. I know we use them. I really don't know if other public clouds are using them, and I don't know that with private clouds, it's one of these things. It depends on the size of the cloud and what your users are like. So if you're like a computer science department everybody knows what they're doing. You can just give them upload privileges because you know where their offices are if they break your cloud. Physics department's the same kind of thing. Everybody knows who's everybody, and they have very particular specialized images, so you can just let them put them in if they want to. But as the clouds start to get larger, then you start to have support concerns because you'll have users who may not be quite familiar with what they know what they want to accomplish, which is to have a server up and running and doing all sorts of stuff. But they might not know how to go from a package of bits to making that happen. So I think as the clouds scale up, you start to have more of a need for something like image import. And then there's the security issues also, because there are various things that you can do, some that are known and some that people are out there discovering all the time to mess things up. So of course you want some way to screen images. And then when I originally presented this, I guess it was the Havana Summit maybe, people were concerned with exporting images. There may be proprietary software or something that you can't allow out of your cloud. So there might be keys, I don't know. It depends on what the technology is at the time. But people were worried they might want to, before they exported an image, you might want to do something to it. You might want to scrub it in some way or repackage it or something for the user. So the import and export tasks seem to make sense as you scale up, basically.
So currently we have import task as a part of the Glance code base, but we do not support export task, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So is that something do you think we can support? So I'm just generalizing that a little bit and say what can be supported as Glance tasks. What do you think is possible and should be possible?
Well, I think it makes sense. I mean, right, the main thing we want is interoperability, at least between OpenStack clouds. So if you want that, then I think you want to be able to take an image out of one cloud, like at Rackspace, and then import it to a different OpenStack cloud, maybe a private one or something somewhere. So I think it makes sense that if you're going to allow imports, you'd want to allow exports. And that being said, I mean, the discussions, so recently, I mean, what's behind this talk, right, is that recently we've sort of revisited the whole usage of tasks and decided, I mean, the dev core team has decided, well, the way the tasks are just too wide open, I mean, for import. We want to have image import in OpenStack. And in fact, the technical council published a resolution in December 2015, so just a few months ago, saying that that's what they want, that all OpenStack clouds must support bring your own kernel for some type of Linux system. And I put a link to the resolution so you can read it for yourself. So OpenStack definitely wants an image import. I mentioned image export because it sort of made sense to plan for both at the same time, but there wasn't a lot of interest in that, which kind of surprised me. I mean, we have interest at Rackspace because people do actually use it. But it's kind of interesting. I mean, the main thing, focus right now is on image import. So.
I guess that makes sense, and sort of brings me to a related question regarding import process. There's a lot of conversation happening around the new image import, and there is a plan to move away from Glance tasks and adopt this new sophisticated import, if you may. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What are the plans and where are we at right now?
Sure. So during this last cycle, I mean, so we had a big session at the summit in Tokyo to discuss image import. The main criticism of task-based image import was that it wasn't really discoverable and that it wasn't really interoperable. And the main, and I talk about this in the, this has just come up just before Vancouver, and then it carried over into the next summit. So if you watch that talk or look at the slides, I explain exactly why that's the case, why people might have problems with that. I mean, basically, we designed it to be flexible, but if you're too flexible, then things get hard to use because you don't know what's constant and what's not. So the new import process is discoverable, like, extremely. workflow changes a bit. Instead of just importing so with the old task-based process, you have your package of bits, you put them in an object store, and then you would tell Glance, go get that stuff and create an image. And so what Glance would do is get the stuff, validate it, and then if it passed validation, it would create an image at that point. The new workflow is going to be similar to the current Glance workflow that admins use, which is you create an image record first, and that gives you a UUID to have as a reference for the rest of the stuff you're doing. And then when you create the image record, coming back in headers would be some information telling you what import process you could use. So when we designed this, we realized different clouds are going to have different capabilities depending on how big they are. So they may have large multi-node Glance clusters, and you might have just like 1 or 2 Glance nodes that have to do everything. So we wanted to have a couple of different ways to get stuff into Glance. The other thing was, since we originally did tasks, there's been the DevCore movement in OpenStack to try to define exactly what counts as OpenStack for trademarking purposes and for sort of advertising, so you can build yourself as an OpenStack cloud. And there's sort of 2 levels. There's OpenStack powered compute, which means that you have Nova, which basically runs the server's control plane. So you have Nova, some networking, and you have Glance, but you don't necessarily have an object store. And the next grade is like an OpenStack powered platform, I think is what it's called. And if you're an OpenStack platform, that means you do have the object store, which is Swift. So at Rackspace, we're OpenStack powered platform. So we have the object store and we have Glance. And so that's why we like this workflow where you put stuff into the object store, because the object store is pretty much designed for people to be constantly uploading stuff to it. That's the whole point. But we had to recognize that not everybody would have that. So I think this is why you're saying the new import process is kind of sophisticated, because what we compromised on in the discussions was that every cloud is going to have to support, to be called, so with all this stuff, there's caveats, right? So if you want to be called an OpenStack powered platform or OpenStack powered compute, you need to support image import once it's available through Glance. But not every cloud is going to have to support exactly the same thing. So we've defined a couple of methods. One would be direct upload to Glance. So you create an image record and then you upload it to Glance. Another would be to go through Swift, which isn't available for all clouds, but the ones that have Swift could do that. And then there could be some other methods too that haven't quite been defined yet. But those are all in the spec. But the basic idea is the discoverability comes from you create the image record, you get back a header telling you which import methods are supported by that cloud. And so in addition to the import methods being precisely defined, each has a particular detailed JSON schema associated with it. So you would know exactly what information you would have to provide in order to import an image in that cloud. So that's why it's gotten, so in some ways it's flexible, but it's kind of constrained also. And there's also another discoverability call, because another thing that we recognize is that, right, since not all clouds are the same, some are going to have, right, it doesn't make sense to have like a 100 gig image if the biggest disk that's actually supported in the cloud is 40 gig, right? That would be just kind of dumb. I mean, you can let people import it, but they're never going to be able to boot from it. So it would just really tick your end users off. So you don't want to do that. So we recognized, all right, so we've got to allow people to put a cap on what can be imported. The other thing we're worried about is, somebody could give you a bit like every 10 seconds, right? And just sort of tie up your Glance node while they're handing you this image, 100 gig image, but like, a bit, one bit per second, which just take a ridiculous amount of time. So we recognize that, all right, you may want to put a time limit on how long you can upload something. Because someone might have a really, really slow connection, or, just as a cloud provider, you don't want them tying up resources that somebody else could be using. So anyway, so those things are configurable. So there's a specific call that allows you to discover all that stuff. So you can discover because the other thing is, right, with the images, they have different container formats and different disk formats. And different clouds use different ones, and there's no OpenStack standard on this yet. And there's no industry standard, really. I mean, everybody uses different things because they're either good for different hypervisors or who knows what, right? So we have to allow, so there's a discovery call that allows you to find out what container format you can import, what disk formats are importable, what the max size is, what the maximum time is, a few other things that I can't remember off the top of my head. So that's gotten a little more complicated, but it is more automatable because since everything's precisely described by JSON schemas, no matter which cloud you go to, you'll know exactly what it is you have to do. So it's possible for people to create good tooling for this. That's the theory.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, thank you for catching up a little bit on the import process. It's good to know about tasks and import and how they're related. I'll have to pull you away a little bit from import and ask another question related to
Sure.
specifically tasks. So we have modified the policies in Glance today, and as a part of Mitaka Tarball, the tasks will only be accessible by admin as a default. So how can we ask the current Glance task operators to expose tasks, to not expose tasks as a public API? And for those operators, like you were saying, they were having a workflow for importing an OVA or maybe a conversion during the import process. How can we ensure that only restricted users or admin users are able to access tasks?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, like in Rackspace, we're in a kind of hard position, right? Because we went with the old task-based way of importing, and we had export, even though it's not quite available everywhere, and looks like not everybody's interested in having it. I mean, we recognize, so I'm sort of speaking for the company here, but I mean, basically, I mean, Rackspace recognizes that there's value in using OpenStack, and there's value in OpenStack being interoperable across various cloud providers. So we believe it's in our interest to come up with something that's acceptable to the community and go with it. Now, the transition away from tasks to this particular import method, I mean, this is what I'm really worried about, right? Because I've been working on this for a couple of months. Right, isn't so bad because the idea of making tasks admin only is that they're still available. So the idea is behind this new import method is we've got a discoverable and interoperable interface that we're presenting to end users. But behind the scenes, what's actually going to happen is Glance Tasks will be doing the work to actually process the import. Now, people who have exposed tasks for various purposes, I mean, they can still expose them. It's just, it's not the preferred means of doing things. Yeah, that's not really that good an answer. I mean, I guess we're gonna have to see what happens. I mean, all I can say is, right, the summit session in Tokyo was pretty well publicized. Actually, it was a pretty full room, and it was much calmer discussion than I expected. And I think it's because we spent a lot of time before the summit talking about it, and we had help from people from the TC, like Doug Hellman came in, so we get the interoperability, and the API working group discussed some of the things we presented. So we had a pretty good groundswell of support that this effort should go forward. And that would have been a good time for people to say, hey, wait a minute, this is going to completely mess things up for us, and nobody's done that. So I really don't know. I mean, it's one of these things where I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, because in this release that's just coming out, right, it's an RC 1 or 2 right now, right? That's where tasks are first being made admin by default. So we'll see what people think about that. I just don't know. I mean, it depends on, so as I said earlier, right, when we propose tasks, we really envision that there would be a lot of stuff people would want to do with images. And there might still be, I just don't know. So, yeah, I guess that's sort of my answer. I really don't know. I mean, the main thing is we recognize that, I mean, you do want to have things interoperable, and we do want them to be discoverable. We want people to be able to create really good tooling that can handle multiple OpenStack clouds so people can move their workloads wherever they need them to. So to make that happen, I think tasks were a bit underdefined. Now you could say, well, we just define them a little more tightly and then stick with them. But the community decided to go a different direction, at least from the import standpoint. Now, I've tried to keep, during our discussion of import, I've tried to keep in mind that, export's right around the corner. People are going to want to do that. Copying images from cloud to cloud might be another thing. I mean, you don't really need the direct copy if you have import and export, because you can just export out of one, import it into the other. Image cloning would be kind of a convenience thing to have, but probably not strictly necessary. So I really don't know. I really don't know. We'll see what the future holds.
Hi. So
Okay.
I just got some jitter.
Okay. Yeah. Pause for a minute. Okay.
So thank you for that input on how we could potentially maybe communicate better in Newton in terms of the existing deployers or the glance tasks operators from older cycles to maybe use the newer import process and accommodate their requirements through different means. And I hope that like yourself and maybe other clouds too will be willing to make that switch and understand the community requirements and what's the right thing for OpenStack. Maybe having an alternative solution that really works would encourage them to make the switch already.
Yes.
They'll probably not have this conversation. Yeah. So do you have any message to our audience, any comments on tasks or anything like that?
No, I mean, so like I was saying, I mean, we haven't heard negative things about making tasks admin only or even removing them altogether. So if you see a problem with that, it would be good to make your voice heard. So you put something on an OpenStack dev list, to Glance or something, just to say, hey, we're using this, and what are your plans to accommodate us? So yeah, I mean, the problem with the summit, I mean, we tried to make sure things were publicized. I sent out a mailing to the product working group and to the operators list, just saying, we're discussing image import. We're talking about how to change this. But at the summit, there's so much stuff going on that not everybody can attend everything that they want to. So it's one of those where that the big drive has been toward discoverability and interoperability, and so that's where things are going. Which isn't necessarily bad, but it is a change, and that's always painful.
Makes sense. And we're trying to do as much as possible for the interoperability aspect of it. So yeah. I think all the operators should only be excited of the new changes coming in.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for coming to OpenStack 2020 and talking about Glance Tasks. I hope all the listeners of the update are going to enjoy this new perspective. Probably they might have heard, or they might not have heard about tasks and how tasks can be potentially useful for import and how they can make a switch to the import process.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.